Hey everyone, and welcome as we continue our study through the New Testament, looking at the New Testament church. And today we're in First Peter 3, which Peter focuses on wives. Yesterday he talked about slaves and servants. Today he's going to talk about wives, and then tomorrow he's going to look at and talk about husbands. And it's all how we should act in our God-given roles, right? And so again, some of this isn't popular, especially in the secular world, but I think if we approach it correctly, right, and I think in the past, sometimes some of these subjects have been approached incorrectly by the church or just flat out contextually wrong and biblically wrong in many ways. And so I think we'll hit this from the biblical standpoint of what Peter's actually saying here in the full context and in the full context of the Bible. And so we're going to get an idea of that. So we'll look at it and then hit the notes as we go through it. And so he starts off First Peter 3. In the same way, you wives must accept the authority of your husbands. Then, even if some refuse to obey the good news, your godly lives will speak to them without any words. They will be won over by observing your pure and reverent lives. And one of the things we're going to see here, I know I'm stopping halfway through this, is that the main focus that Peter's writing to here is not really, excuse me, wives who are married to Christian husbands, but mainly his main focus in this is wives who are married, or Christian women who are married to non-Christian husbands. And so keep that in mind as we reread this as well. Don't be concerned about the outward beauty of fancy hairstyles, expensive jewelry, or beautiful clothes. You should clothe yourselves instead with the beauty that comes from within, the unfading beauty of a gentle and quiet spirit, which is so precious to God. This is how the holy women of old made themselves beautiful. They put their trust in God and accepted the authority of their husbands. For instance, Sarah obeyed her husband Abraham and called him her master. You are her daughter when you do what is right without fear and what your husband without fear of what your husband might do. And so First Peter 3, 1 through 6 on this. This is the last of Peter's three exhortations about accepting authority. And these last two concern wives and husbands. And Peter says to the wives, accept the authority of, or literally, it's that same kind of thing we saw with Paul when he wrote, is to submit to, right? Your husbands. Wives are instructed to acknowledge that God has accepted the husband or appointed the husband as the head of the relationship. And again, like we've talked about in this past, this isn't like a master like servant relationship or anything like that. It's that God has appointed men to in a Christian, especially in Christian relationships, and even outside, which we see here, to be the head of the leader. I'll say more than anything, the leader of that relationship. Well, it doesn't make him better or anything like that. It's just that God has appointed roles here, and so we need to understand what that looks like as we go through this. And so he's telling these wives, especially those Christian wives who are married to non-Christian husbands, to still accept his authority, even though he's not a Christian. And he gives the reason why here in a little bit. Right, submission in the ancient world took the form of obedience, and so, and again, this isn't the type of like you have to do everything I say, like basically submitting to abusive type relationship, abusive type behavior. That's not what we're talking about here. And sometimes in the church, that's what they've pushed. They say, well, even if you're, I've seen it, right? I've seen where they're like, well, my husband's abusing me. He's being verbally abusive or physically abusive, and people in the church would encourage them to go back to them. And it's like, no, no, well, that's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about people who are good husbands, and and in some cases, especially Christian husbands, but even husbands who aren't Christians who are still good husbands. The idea was, okay, God has still appointed them to be the leader of your relationship, of the marriage, and to be there for you, to help you, to protect you. And so, you submit to that type of authority, and that's what we're looking at here. And so God had intended the husbands, in this to be loving and respectful, right, as the head of to love their wives like Christ loved the church. Now, and this is the example I've used in the past. If a husband's willing to do that, and we're going to look at the husbands tomorrow. If a husband loves his wife like he loves, or like Christ loved the church, then that is the type of man that a woman would want to be under, right? Would want to submit to, right? Would want to be in a relationship with, and have them help guide and lead, and help them in life. And that's it. And it's not a thing saying, oh well, women can't take care of themselves, women can't, women have to have it. That's not what we're saying. I think anyone who's gone through this and understands this, that two people linked together, right, in a relationship, and working to the mutual respect of each other, right, submitting to each other, right, working with each other as one, is a beautiful thing. And so when it's done correctly, and that's the thing. But when it's taken out of context and used for abusive situations, or to be abusive, or to be in a way that's not Christ-like, then that's sometimes that's the church has gone beyond that, and approved of some of that stuff, and that's where we need to make sure we're careful with that. And so, like I said in this, Peter's main focus is especially on wives with pagan husbands or non-Christian husbands who would potentially be hostile to the wife's faith, not hostile towards her, right, but hostile to her faith, or not agree with her faith. And so what Peter urges here is that Christian wives to evangelize to their husbands who might not agree with their faith, and be evangelize to their husbands, right, through their submissive and appropriate behavior, through their faith. If you're married to someone, and I don't agree with their faith, and maybe I push her on her faith, or I say things about her faith, or maybe we argue about her faith, and if her behavior is Christ-like in that situation, Peter's saying, look, that's going to evangelize to him. That's going to work against him. Whether if you argued with him and debated and did all these other things, well, then that's not going to more than likely win you over. But by acting like the Christian person, and especially the Christian wife that Christ has called us, or called the wives to act like, or to be, then that's going to win. That potentially could win the husband over. And again, like I said, it's not calling women to be doormats. It's not calling that kind of thing. It's that attitude of, okay, yeah, we don't agree on this, but I'm still going to be Christ-like towards you in this situation. I'm not going to argue with you about it. I'm not going to, we're not going to have words about it. We're just, this is, I'm going to show you Christ by my actions. That's kind of the theme for all Christians, but especially the Christian wives here that Peter's getting at. And so, the other thing he gets on to, or I don't say gets on to, but discusses, is the fancy hairstyles, expensive jewelry, and beautiful clothes. And some people will interpret this to say that it condemns any form of female, or like dressing up, right, doing fancy hair, having expensive. That's not what the purpose is of this. It's not what Peter's saying. Peter's not saying it's bad to have that thing. Instead, what he's saying is that Christian women should be noticed for the beauty, should not be noticed for the beauty of their clothing and hair and jewels, but instead should be known for the beauty of a gentle and quiet spirit, right, of a kind soul. That kind of things, right? And that's what he's saying. Not be known for all the fancy stuff, but be known for how gentle and quiet, not in the sense of, oh, they don't talk, but in the sense of not quarrelsome, right, not trying to bring attention to themselves all the time. Someone who is kind and loving, and that kind of stuff. That's what Peter's saying. Those type of things will win people over. Those are the type of beauties that Christians should go for, not the outside physical or possessions type of beauty there. And so then he goes on to talk about how the faithful women of old, right? And he says, and he called him her master, talking about Abraham and Sarah. Now, again, I'm to understand this and to make sure this, we're not saying that the men should view themselves as the master in a relationship, and that's not what Peter is saying here either. It's using the words to show a message here. And Peter's views this addresses as Sarah's. It's her overall attitude toward Abraham. Is it someone she looked up to, right? Someone she looked up to as a leader in their marriage to guide them and lead them, and then that's the kind of stuff that. And so, and then he finishes it with the line of, without fear of what your husbands might do. And Christian wives that were married to unbelievers frequently found themselves pressured both, to abandon their Christian principles and values. And so Peter urges them to continue to doing what is right in that situation, and to continue to do that. And I want to get to the line of this is, because again, some of this has been taken so far out of context that it's been twisted in outside the church and inside the church to put husbands and to put men in a position and level that they're not supposed to be. And I want to address that, right? This is the idea, and we're going to get to the husbands, and like always, like even when Paul's writing, sometimes men in the church and certain people in the church like to focus on the commands to the wives, but then ignore what the husbands are called to do and who we are called to be. And that's the thing, because the men who are, God appointed to be leaders in their household, right, especially spiritual leaders in their household, you know, are given a ton more responsibility than the wives are in the submission to their husband's aspect. All right. And then we're even called to submit to one another. And Paul, wrote about that as well. And so we need to make sure that we understand that, because I don't want this to be taken out of context. And I want to understand that this is the type of person, like if I'm a female and I'm a wife, right, then I'm looking for a husband who I'm willing to and would want to submit to in this sense, you know, look up to, and have a husband, excuse me, who is the type of husband, the type of leader that you're like, you know what, I'm putting myself under this person because he's going to take care of me. He's going to help me. We are going to build a wonderful life together. And that's what that looks like. And it's a loving thing. There's nothing abusive about it. There's nothing unchristian about it. And that's what the type of relationship that we look for. So I hope that makes sense. Sometimes I feel like maybe I go in a circle when I'm trying to hit this, but I want to make sure that I overemphasize a little bit on this, because I think it's been misconstrued in the church and in religious circles, and so I want to make sure that it is interpreted correctly when we talk about this, and when we talk about the wife submitting to the husband, and the husband submitting to the wife, and the husbands being the leaders of in a relationship, and what that, especially the spiritual leader, and what that looks like. So I hope you all learned from this. If you have any questions, comments, as always, you can put them in the comment section, or you can reach out to us directly if there's anything that I didn't hit clearly enough on that. But I always like to phrase that there. As always, I encourage you to subscribe to our channel if you haven't done so. That way you can continue to follow along with us. And as always, I appreciate everyone who takes the time to watch, and I hope y'all have a wonderful day.